apparently the back pews are very popular. There's more light up front and more comfortable up front. And yeah, Tom's not as bad as he looks. Our study is in Judges 17 this evening. I know we had mentioned chapters 3 and 4 last Wednesday, but upon further review, I decided probably these last chapters really coincide more with chapters 1 and 2 than any of the others because they deal with the same period of time. And of course, it's out of order chronologically, and that's obvious when you read the material here. And we'll see as we go through our study that obviously the things that occurred in the two major incidents that occurred in these chapters occurred right after the death of Joshua, and that interim period, as we read in chapters 1 and 2, where that generation was dying out and another generation was coming to the forefront. And we see how things were rapidly digressing, and that's what these chapters here reveal. One thing I want to mention is, for example, chapter 18, which we'll read in just a moment, Lord willing. But just to kind of lay the groundwork here, verse 30 of chapter 18, the children of Dan set up for themselves the graven image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Moses. Now, if you have a King James text, it probably says Manasseh there. Yeah, Manasseh. But he was the grandson of Moses. The Jewish scribes literally took the liberty of inserting Manasseh here over the name Moses because they were so embarrassed that the grandson of Moses would so digress as Jonathan did, and so they just simply inserted this, one of those intentional insertions, and that's borne out from textual criticism, and most of the modern translations have it corrected, but it is the grandson of Moses. He and his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. So again, I wanted you to see kind of the time frame when we're discussing these matters. This is the grandson of Moses in chapter 18. Now, chapter 20, which we probably will not get to tonight, well, we'll see. But in, again, chapter 20, and the terrible incident that's recorded there, the Israelites inquired of the Lord. In those days, the writer says, the Ark of the Covenant of God was there with Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, ministering before it. They asked, shall we go up again to battle with Benjamin, our brother, or not? So, again, Phinehas is the grandson of Aaron. And so we have this generation, the grandchildren of Moses and Aaron are some of the leading names in the incident recorded in these chapters. You'll notice in these chapters there is no judge. So we're not reading about a particular judge that delivered anyone. We read about a civil war that took place and nearly completely annihilated one of the tribes of Israel. But again, there's no judge in these chapters. It's almost as though when Samuel was writing the book of Judges, he just threw this in at the end, kind of to give us, I guess, an overview of what it was that led to the events recorded in the lives of the judges. What brought about that state of affairs where the judges were brought to the forefront and God was able to use them to deliver his people? What brought them to that state? And that's what we're reading here. It's kind of a commentary, a further commentary on what we read in chapters 1 and 2, where there was a generation that came immediately after Joshua and that generation that outlived him. But again, these things were taking place in that kind of mingled together in that same transitional period. Now, we'll just read the text together, and I want you to see for yourselves what I'm saying. It pretty much speaks for itself. We're going to entitle tonight's lesson, The Bible's Outlaws. And that's what we're really reading about. These are outlaw people, and it's an outlaw scene that we're here having described for us. But again, I want you to think in terms of this is just the grandchildren of these great leaders, Moses and Aaron. And this is just how quickly things have gone awry. So let's just read the text together and we'll make comments. There was a man from the mountains of Ephraim whose name was Micah. And he said to his mother, the 1,100 shekels of silver that were taken from you, and on which you put a curse, even saying it in my ears, here is the silver with me, I took it. His mother said, may you be blessed by the Lord, my son. So when he had returned the 1,100 shekels of silver to his mother said, I had wholly dedicated the silver from my hand to the Lord for my son to make a carved image and a molded image. Now therefore I will return it to you. Thus he returned the silver to his mother. His mother took 200 shekels of silver, gave them to the silversmith, and he made it into a carved image and a molded image. And they were in the house of Micah. Now, before I continue reading, has anything caught your attention yet? Have you noticed anything odd about what I've just read to you? They're doing what? Okay. What were the first two commandments in the 10 Commandments? That Moses, by the way, the grandfather, no graven images. But this was dedicated to Jehovah, dedicated to the Lord by this woman to make these idol gods. We'll say more about that in a moment. It's rather remarkable. And so Micah had a shrine, and he made an ephod. That would be that girdle, if you will, or that girdle. What do you call that when you? No. What do you wear when you're cooking stuff? Apron, yeah. It was a priestly apron and household idols, and he consecrated one of his sons who became his priest. You notice anything yet? He made him a priest, and he's not a Levite. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes. Now there was a young man from Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah. He was a Levite and was staying there. The man departed from the city of Bethlehem in Judah to stay wherever he could find a place. He came to the mountains of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, as he journeyed. And Micah said to him, where do you come from? So he said to him, I'm a Levite from Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm on my way to find a place to stay. Micah said to him, dwell with me, and be a father and a priest to me, and I will give you 10 shekels of silver per year, a suit of clothes, and your sustenance. So the Levite went in. And the Levite was content to dwell with the man, and the young man became like one of his sons to him. So Micah consecrated the Levite, and the young man became his priest, and lived in the house of Micah. Then Micah said, now I know that the Lord will be good to me, since I have a Levite as priest. Why are you laughing? You ought to laugh. It's remarkable, isn't it? I mean, this is crazy. But again, this is just a generation removed, and this is how people are behaving. And this is just a simple description of life in Israel. I mean, soon after the death of Moses and Joshua and that generation. Okay, in those days, verse chapter 18, there was no king in Israel. And in those days, the tribe of the Danites was seeking an inheritance for itself to dwell in, for until that day, their inheritance was among the tribes of Israel had not fallen to them. Actually, it's kind of misleading the way it's worded here, because the Danites had, in fact, already received their inheritance. We read about that already in chapter 1 and verse 34. But they did not conquer the Amorites sufficiently, and so the Amorites ran them out of their inheritance. And so they're looking for an easy place to go. They're looking for an easy path. So the children of Dan sent 5 men of their family from their, again, notice the wording, from their territory, men of valor from Zoar and Estel, which, by the way, in Joshua chapter 19, that was the inheritance of Dan. and that's where they're sending these spies from. To spy out the land and search it, they said to them, "Go search the land." So they went to the mountains of Ephraim, to the house of Micah, and lodged there. While they were at the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. They turned aside and said to him, "Who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? And what do you have here?" He said to them, "Thus and so Micah did for me. He has hired me, and I have become his priest." So they said to him, "Please inquire of God, that we may know whether the journey on which we will go will be prosperous." And the priest said to them, "Go in peace. The presence of the Lord be with you on your way." So the 5 men departed and went to Laish. They saw the people who were there, how they dwelt safely, in the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and secure. There were no rulers in the land who might put them to shame for anything. They were far from the Sidonians, and they had no ties with anyone. Then the spies came back to their brethren at Zorah and Eshtaol, and their brethren said to them, "What is your report?" And they said, "Arise, let us go up against them, for we have seen the land, and indeed it is very good. Would you do nothing? Do not hesitate to go and enter to possess the land. When you go, you will come to a secure people and a large land, for God has given it into your hands, a place where there is no lack of anything that is on the earth." And 600 men of the family of the Danites went from there, from Zorah, and Eshtaol, armed with weapons of war. They went up and encamped in Kirjath-jearim in Judah. Therefore they call that place Mahani Dan to this day. There it is west of Kirjath-jearim. And they passed from there to the mountains of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah. Then the 5 men who had gone to spy out the country of Laish answered and said to their brethren, "Do you know that there are in these houses an ephod, household idols, a carved image, and a molded image? Now therefore consider what you should do." So they turned aside there and came to the house of the young Levite man, the house of Micah, and greeted him. I imagine that was an interesting greeting. The 600 men armed with their weapons of war, who were of the children of Dan, stood by the entrance of the gate. Then the 5 men who had gone to spy out the land went up. Entering there, they took the carved image, the ephod, the household idols, and the molded image. The priest stood at the entrance of the gate with the 600 men who were armed with weapons of war. And when these went into Micah's house and took the carved image, the ephod, the household idols, and the molded image, the priest said to them, "What are you doing?" Then they said to him, "Be quiet, put your hand over your mouth, come with us. Be a father and a priest to us. Is it better for you to be a priest to the household of one man, or that you be a priest to a tribe and a family in Israel?" So the priest's heart was glad, and he took the ephod, the household idols, the carved image, and took its place among the people. And they turned and departed and put the little ones, the livestock, and the goods in front of them. And when they were a good way from the house of Micah, the men who were in the houses near Micah's house gathered together and overtook the children of Dan. And they called out to the children of Dan. So they turned around and said to Micah, "What ails you that you have gathered such a company?" So he said, "You have taken away my God, which I made, and the priest, and you've gone away. Now what more do I have? How can you say to me, 'What ails you?'" And the children of Dan said to him, "Do not let your voice be heard among us, lest angry men fall upon you, and you lose your life with the lives of your household." Then the children of Dan went their way, and when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his house. So they took the things Micah had made, and the priest who had belonged to him, and went to Laish to a people quiet and secure, and they struck them with the edge of the sword and burned the city with fire. There was no deliverer, because it was far from Sidon, and they had no ties with anyone. It was in the valley that belonged to Beth Rehob. So they built the city and dwelt there, and they called the name of the city Dan, after the name of Dan, their father, who was born to Israel. However, the name of the city formerly was Laish. Then the children of Dan set up for themselves the carved image, and Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Moses, and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. So they set up for themselves Micah's carved image, which he had made all the time that the house of God was in Shiloh. Now, there's a lot of information that probably needs to be addressed, and I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to keep up with. If you have a question about anything we've read, please don't hesitate to raise your hand, and we'll try to address it. One of the things I want to mention, of course, is the obvious state of affairs here is a very lawless state. You might think in terms of the wild, wild west, back in the days when they had, the sheriff might show up occasionally and might arrest a few, rabble-rousers. But, if you wasn't around, nobody could gather a posse together to come after you. Well, then you could pretty much do what you wanted. I mean, that was just the rule of the West for a long period of time. And it seemed to be the case here in Israel. But now we've seen more than once in this reading already this refrain: there was no king in Israel, therefore every man did what was right in his own eyes. Now I've been mulling that over in my mind as to what exactly that means, and I'll just share with you what is troubling me about it. The more I study this, the more I am convinced that Samuel was indeed the writer, and he was indeed writing this period of history during the early days of the reign of Saul. We might say during Saul's honeymoon period, the first king in Israel. But now, it seems, in fact, Burton Kaufman seems to think, I don't particularly agree with everything he says about this. He seemed to think that the inspired writer, Samuel, was making the case for a king in Israel. And this period of history proves why we need a king. Now, there's a couple of problems I have with that. And the first problem comes from Samuel himself. Because you remember 1 Samuel 8, when the elders of Israel, this is talking about years later now, but when the elders of Israel came to Samuel, they said, we don't want you or your son, or your sons in particular, ruling or being judges in Israel because they don't walk in your ways. They're not like you. They're not good men like you are. And so Samuel was not happy. In fact, verse 6 of 1 Samuel 8 says the thing displeased Samuel when they said, give us a king to judge us. Samuel didn't think it was a good idea. So Samuel prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said to Samuel, heed the voice of the people in all that they say to you, for they have not rejected you. So now we learn what the real reason for Samuel's displeasure was. It wasn't that they wanted a king instead of a judge. It was they didn't want him or his sons. And so he felt rejected, as though, we're not good enough for you. You have to find someone else to reign over you. And so God is making it clear to Samuel that's not really the case. They're rejecting me. God intended for his people to see him as their king. There wasn't any question about that. God was and is their king, but he was their king. But they were rejecting his rule, obviously. Because when you read the next part of the phrase, every man did what was right in his own eyes. What does that tell you? What had they done? They had jettisoned something, and what was it they had already jettisoned? Okay, among other things. Now there is, if you read carefully, there's embedded in this a clear knowledge of the law of Moses. They were well aware. In fact, the cursing and the blessing from the mother of Micah, that was in keeping with teaching straight out of Exodus. In fact, you could overturn the curse that she'd already placed on it now that her son's come forward and he's confessed to taking the money. Well, now she's placing a blessing on him, so it kind of overturns the curse. That's all, again, part of the law of Moses. They recognize those things as part of the law. And yet, look at what they're doing with the money. What did they do with that silver? They're making idol gods. She said, I dedicated it to the Lord so we could make idol gods. It's crazy. Again, they're jettisoning not so much the Ten Commandments per se. I believe they're jettisoning any recognition or understanding of an objective standard of authority. Who's going to rule here? Who's going to be in charge here? And I suppose you could make the argument that this phrase, when there was no king in Israel, or before there was a king in Israel, that the writer is, among other things, saying that before there was any law and order, before there was any established form of governance, people are kind of lawless and just going about doing their own thing, wasn't anyone to keep them in line. I suppose in that sense, you could make the case for the king yet again. there was something in place to keep them in line. And that was the law of Moses. It was God's word. And it was the Levites in particular who did not have an inheritance. They were not given a land inheritance. Instead, they were to be intentionally scattered among the tribes. Why? So they could continue to share the knowledge of God and his word among those various tribes to keep them in line. And yet, what do we find with this grandson of Moses? What is he doing? He's being bought at a price, literally. He's more than happy to take these wages and do with them as he pleases. Now, among the other things that we see in this period of time was gross idolatry. And yet, what's really striking is in chapter 17, verse 13, when Micah said, "Now I know the Lord will be good to me, since the Levite has become my priest." He was just certain that this is what God would have me to do, and this is God's blessing on me, because he's given me a Levite. And what was the Levite in charge of? Well, the law, but what's he in charge of in Micah's house? The idol gods, the shrine that they've erected to these idol gods. Now, likely these idol gods were probably an image of a calf, maybe. That's what Aaron made. He made a golden calf. And of course, that was a symbol that was used frequently in Israel. But it was to represent the Lord, to represent Jehovah. And so they're using these idol gods to represent the Lord, the one true God. It's kind of a mixture, if you will, of paganism, idolatry, and the true worship that God had assigned them. But again, it's amazing that this syncretism has gone this far, this fast. And it's this widely accepted, apparently. And even the grandson of Moses is more than happy to go along with it. I mean, really? I mean, this is really hard to believe. Yet, this is what we're told. And we know that indeed it was the case. You know, it's amazing when you think about this attitude, though. I know the Lord will be good to me. It didn't seem to occur to Micah that what he had done was in violation of the first two commandments in the law. It's like he had to know that, and yet he didn't seem to remember that. And you think, how could someone do that? How could someone know what the law said? It's so plain. You are to not make graven images of anything in heaven or earth. And yet make a graven image and say, I'm dedicating this to God. How could they do that? It just doesn't make sense. Let me ask you this question. When Jesus said, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, he that believes and is baptized shall be saved, and someone said, baptism ain't got nothing to do with salvation, how is that possible? I don't know. They're reading those words. They know who said it, and yet flatly deny. That's what it means. But that's what the Lord said. How can they go against what the Lord said? And then they go to church and they have their choirs and their pianos and all these, fabulous forms of worship. And they say, we know God is pleased because we had goosebumps today and the hair on the back of our neck was standing up and, ooh, it was just so entertaining. And we know the Lord is going to bless us. It's the same mindset. Everybody's doing as they please. Whatever is in their heart, that's what they're going to do. Without even asking, what would God have us to do? What's God's will in this matter? Didn't occur to them, or it doesn't occur to them. So again, we look at what happened here and we think, that's crazy. It's happening now. It happens all the time. Many think that God's going to bless them, even though they're not doing what God told them to do. Matthew 15, Jesus told the Pharisees, in vain you worship me. You're wasting your time. Your worship doesn't do you any good. And yet they thought of themselves as, we're the religious leaders. We're looked up to. We're highly esteemed. And yet the Lord said, you're wasting your time because you're worshiping according to the doctrine of men, the teaching of men. You're not even consulting God's word. You're not interested in what God said. You set aside the law of God to do your own thing. And Jesus, of course, made that very clear to them. So again, let's just think about what it is we're discussing here. There's a rejection of God's worship, manner of worship, and even the place of worship. He's erecting a shrine here, and then the Danites themselves, they also erected their own shrine. In time to come, Dan would also be featured in the northern nation of Israel's departure under the reign of Jeroboam. And Dan would be the place where that, again, idol image or shrine was set up. So apparently those people had a tendency to go in that direction from their very beginning. And so we see that here. And so they're erecting their own shrine, their own place of worship. And notice again what the writer said in the last part of the last verse of chapter 18. And all this was happening while the house of God was in Shiloh. Why was that even mentioned? Why do you think he threw that in? That's where they should have been worshiping, and not in Dan. And not in Micah's house with his own son as a priest, with his own ephod and their own shrine. Moses had already addressed this. The grandfather of Jonathan had already addressed this. In Deuteronomy 12, verse 1 beginning, these are the statutes and judgments which you shall be careful to observe in the land which the Lord God of your fathers is giving you to possess. All the days that you live on the earth, you shall utterly destroy all the places where the nation which you shall dispossess, serve their gods on the high mountains and on the high hills and under every green tree. You shall destroy their altars, break their sacred pillars, burn their wooden images with fire. You shall cut down the carved images of their gods, destroy their names from that place. You shall not worship the Lord your God with such things. So what did Micah's mother say? I've dedicated this silver to these things, the very things that Moses said don't do. How could someone read that and still do it? I don't know. We got a lot of questions we could ask. I don't know how people read what the Bible plainly says and just deny it. Let the women keep silence in the church, not permitting them to speak. What's wrong with the woman preaching? I mean, why are we arguing with Paul? I mean, well, say it was a male chauvinist pig. Okay, well, if that's your thought, then what you've just said is, I can pick and choose what part of the Bible I want to believe and what I want to follow. Maybe that's what they were doing. Maybe they were simply saying, well, we don't believe Moses was just having a bad day when he recorded that in Deuteronomy 12. He was in a bad mood. He didn't take his medicine that morning or something. He just got off on the wrong side of the bed or something. Maybe, he didn't mean it. You think, well, people are still reasoning that way. But you shall seek the place where the Lord your God chooses out of all the tribes to put his name for his dwelling place, and there you shall go. There you shall take your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, the heave offerings of your hand, your vowed offerings, your freewill offerings, and the firstborn of your herds and flocks. And there you shall eat before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice in all which you have put your hand, you and your households, in which the Lord your God has blessed you. You shall not at all do as we are doing here today, every man doing whatever is right in his own eye. Moses was already dealing with it. They were already doing this in Moses' day. They were already doing what every man pleases. And Moses says, you can't do that. For as yet you have not come to the rest and inheritance which the Lord your God is giving you. But when you cross over the Jordan and dwell in the land which the Lord your God is giving you to inherit, and he gives you rest from all your enemies round about, so that you dwell in safety, then there will be a place where the Lord your God chooses to make his name abide, and there you shall bring all that I command you, your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, the heave offerings of your hand, and all your choice offerings which you vow to the Lord, and you shall rejoice before the Lord your God, you and your sons and your daughters, your male and female servants, and the Levite who was within your gate, since he has no portion nor inheritance with you. Take heed to yourself that you do not offer your burnt offerings in every place that you see, but in the place which the Lord chooses in one of your tribes, there you shall offer your burnt offerings, and there you shall do that I had commanded you. That's pretty straightforward. And what we just read contradicts literally everything pretty much that the law of Moses stood for, while there seemingly was some semblance of wanting to honor God and semblance of wanting to maintain connection to the law, the Levitical system. But again, These people are literally doing whatever they please. Now, I want you to notice the Danites, as a tribe, the second largest fighting group, over 60,000 fighting men in that tribe. And yet, when you read in chapter 1, verse 34, and I'll just read it very quickly. We read this, I think, last week. Verse 34 of chapter 1, the Amorites forced the children of Dan into the mountains, for they would not allow them to come down to the valley. And the Amorites were determined to dwell in Mount Heres and Aijalon and in Shaalabim, yet when the strength of the house of Joseph became greater, they were put under tribute. Wait a minute. When God told Israel to go in and possess the land, God said, I'm going to go with you, right? I'm going to fight for you. And he did. But not always. You remember, even in the day of Joshua, after they had taken Jericho, they went to a small village named Ai, and there Israel was humiliated in utter defeat. Why? Because they had sin in the camp, and God was no longer among them and was not blessing them. You suppose, as we look at all these individual tribes, as they're seeking their own territory that's been allotted to them by Joshua, do you suppose that there were various tribes that were not faithful to the Lord and were not serving the Lord and did not put their trust in the Lord, and the Lord therefore did not deliver them? Well, we just read that last week. God, in fact, intentionally left many of the inhabitants of the land to test them. But why were they left in the first place? Well, what do we read about these 5 spies? What did they discover in Laish? What kind of people were there? There were what? Well, they may have been idolatrous people, but that's not what's mentioned about the Laish people. They were simply a quiet, peaceful people. Yeah, they were laid back. They didn't have any association with anyone else. They were kind of off to themselves, kind of a hippie commune. They're like, no, we're out here enjoying ourselves, one with nature. And they'll, hey, this will be easy pickings. And so what you see with the Danites is, we don't want to have to put up a fight with the Amorites. So, they don't want us living there. But God gave them that land. You're supposed to possess that land. What does that tell you about the Danites? Obviously, they were living in fear and not walking by faith. If they had walked by faith, they would have taken the territory that God gave them, and the Amorites wouldn't have been an issue. And they wouldn't be having to migrate to another place and steal it from a people that really they had no business stealing it from. They just went and took it from this peaceful people and changed the name of Laish to Dan. That's a tragic tale, really. But, they killed everybody. Any of you ever watched Star Trek, some of those old Star Trek shows? Some of those planets that they visit in this sci-fi world. You see some of these worlds where everybody's at peace and everything's happy and they're all living in harmony, and but there's some weird thing lurking in the background.
Careless and insecure.
Yeah, what's that?
Careless and insecure.
What's insecure?
They were careless and insecure.
They were careless and insecure. Yeah, but perhaps that was the case. But the Danites were brutal people. They passed by the house of Micah on their way there, one of their brothers, and they ripped him off, stole his priest, and then stole his idol gods and stole his shrine. Why did they think they had a right to do that? Well, they had 600 armed men. That's why they had a right to do it. Bigger than you, better than you. It's all right, we're going to take it. Can you imagine, let's say, a world without a police force? Just imagine a downtown area, and we've defunded the police, and there's no police force. Well, who's going to maintain law and order? Well, who's got the most guns? And who has more people on their side? Which gang do you belong to? That's literally what's being described here. It's lawlessness. And so might makes right. And it also, I think, touches on a bigger picture. Whenever any society or culture jettisons or rejects objective truth, whenever we get rid of the idea that reality and truth is outside of myself, I don't create it. We live in a weird time. Postmodernists are weirdos, and they have this weirdo version of reality. We make it up. It's all in our head. Well, slap them sometimes. I always thought I told my professors that when I was in school. I said, well, if one of mine said that, I'd make a paper and throw it in, a dart in it, throw it in his eye. Well, how'd that feel? Why did you imagine me doing that to you? I mean, that's just crazy. If everything is a construct of your imagination, well, then I can do what I want, and I can imagine you not responding to me because that's just my reality. It's absurd. I mean, but that's the world we live in. And you say, you're crazy. I'm not crazy. Have you watched anything that's going on in the world today? Have you realized where we are? How did we get here? We rejected objective truth. We think that whatever I want, whatever I believe, that's just the way it is. That's my truth. You see that all the time on social media. You speak your truth. I'm sorry. That's an absurd phrase. I mean, your truth versus my truth. Truth is truth for everybody. I don't care if you believe it or reject it. It's true. I mean, you throw something up, it's gonna come down. It's probably stick in your case, but if you throw something up, for everybody else, it's going to come down because the law of gravity says so. But I don't believe in the law of gravity. I don't think it exists. Well, jump off the building then. I mean, it's just absurd. But that's the world we live in. And that's the world we're seeing described here. And it's tragic. And it's creating serious issues in our culture. Serious issues for so-called lawmakers. And makes you wonder, well, what are the lawmakers? Because they're really, in fact, dismantling the laws and no longer prosecuting crime. It's really sad. And so we have stealing and a willingness on the part of the religious leader to be bought at a price. I'm thinking about 2 Peter chapter 2 and Peter's reference to Balaam and his following, the wages of unrighteousness. A lot of preachers today, they'll preach whatever the congregation wants them to preach because they're wanting to keep their job. And they don't want to lose their job. And then if they take a stand on certain things, they'll probably lose their job. And so they simply follow the money and do whatever the money tells them to do. And that's never a good thing when those who are supposed to be preaching God's word are preaching for money instead. It clearly was a time that lacked leadership. If there is an issue that is confronting all of us today, it is a lack of leadership. We have a lack of leadership in our government, for sure. And I'm not trying to be political. I'm just stating a fact. I mean, we honestly are in a very sad state of affairs. Who's really running the White House? We don't know. We're told that there are certain people behind the curtain pulling the strings. We don't know who these people are. Who's really in charge? Who's really pushing this agenda? Come on, man. I don't know who it is, but somebody's back there, and they're calling the shots, and it ain't the one who we see in front of the camera every day. Obviously. You can't even read the teleprompter. And I'm not trying to be ugly. I'm just stating a fact. He doesn't know what day of the week it is, and yet he's our president. And you say, you shouldn't say that. Why can't I? It's the truth. It's the truth. And we all know it. And it's sad. This is the world we live in. And so we have no leadership. We have no one to really tell us what we should or show us what we should be. Wouldn't it be great if we had leaders that we could look to and admire? I wish I were like that man or that woman. I wish I could emulate them in some way. Instead, we're ashamed of those who were supposed to be our leaders. Our homes are devastated today. Regina could tell you this. A couple of weeks ago, I got a message in the middle of the night from one of my former inmates, and he was crying for help, and I didn't know what had happened. Long story, I won't give you all the details, but he's one that had served on my detail for a while, and he's been out for about a year and a half. But got back with his old girlfriend, and she's a meth head, and he was back on meth, and so he's messed up really bad. He had a break from reality and shot up his mother's house, and so she kicked him out. In fact, he threatened to shoot her in the head because he was in a psychotic break or whatever. So she threw him out of the house. Now, I knew when I worked with a young man that he never knew his father, never had a relationship with his father, and I always assumed that, that lack of father figure in his family probably contributed to his poor choices in life, and no doubt it did. In fact, we talked at length about that. But then when I talked with his mother later, she told me her side of the story, what had happened. And it's sad. But he had been injured in a motorcycle accident, and in addition to that, he had a staph infection. He had MRSA and staph, and was very much suffering and could die from it. And so she said rather flippantly to me, I don't know if the MRSA is going to kill him or if those drugs are going to kill him. He's going to die either way. That was his mother, describing to me the fate of her son. And she said it that flippantly. I don't know about you, but that disturbs me. That there are people, millions and millions and millions of people, who grew up in homes just like that. No father, and the mother could care less if you live or die. What do we expect children to become if that's how they're raised? Wouldn't it be good if our homes were governed by God's word, and we had men and women taking on their responsibility as husbands and wives and mothers and fathers and grandfathers and grandmothers? Can you imagine the difference it would make in the lives of these young men? That young man that I'm describing to you, very talented, very smart young man, may be dead as far as I know. I don't know what had become of him, but again, his story could be repeated many times over. Our churches are in sore need of leadership. We need men that will step up to the plate and become elders, serve as deacons. We need gospel preachers. We need Bible class teachers. We need people here working on a regular basis. We're about to launch a major program here that's going to entail a lot of work for a lot of us, and it's going to require all hands on deck, and I'll be saying more about that in the coming days. But rather, we really need strong leadership among ourselves. And of course, our ultimate leader is none other than God. Any questions or comments about chapters 17 and 18? I don't think we'll have time to get into the other chapters this evening, but does anyone have a comment? Any thoughts?
As Levi, he was the priest of that one man.
Yeah.
Then they said, hey, you come with us. Don't say anything. We got a big pay raise there. And he was willing to go with them.
Bought and paid for. Yeah.
But he wasn't a priest.
Well, he was a Levite.
Well, I mean, you'd think if he was a priest, the first thing he would have done is said, well, you can't have these idols.
Well, you'd think so, wouldn't you?
You would.
Until the Babylonian captivity, and the Syrian captivity, Jews were always prone to idolatry.
They were.
As soon as Jeroboam pulled away the northern tribes and set up calves to Dan and said, these are your gods, people fell right into it.
Absolutely.
After the death of Solomon, David and Solomon.
Yeah. You know, if Burton Kaufman is correct, and that's what troubled me earlier in my observations about that phrase, when there was no king in Israel, if he was an inspired writer making that observation, it's troubling to me, because when you look at the history of the kings, with the exception of maybe 2 or 3, there weren't any good kings. In fact, the kings were probably worse than what we're reading about here. They did that and then some. In fact, God said, because of the reign of Manasseh, that he was going to do such a thing in Judah that whoever hears about it, his ears will tingle. He's going to turn Judah upside down and wipe it as a man would wipe a ditch. I mean, it was bad. I mean, this was a serious situation, a state of affairs under the kings. So it's hard for me to imagine that an inspired writer would be making the case for a king. But if I'm understanding it correctly, I think his case is more generally the idea there wasn't any recognition of the leadership that they should have sought, which ultimately was God. And that's the case with us. I mean, when you think about what's happening to this country, I think about men like John Adams and what he said about our country in the earliest days, 1798. He said, we have no government armed with power, capable of contending with human passions, unbridled by morality and religion. Avarice, ambition, revenge, gallantry would break the strongest cords of our Constitution as a whale goes through a net. Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other. I mean, they recognize that as long as the citizens here recognize King Jesus, I got 5 minutes, hold on. If they recognize the authority of King Jesus, deacons are bad about that. You notice that? 5 minutes, 6 minutes now, you may be mad. So if you notice, that's what the founders said. And it's still true. If we as Americans recognize who Jesus truly is to us, individually, in families, in churches, it would be a whole different situation than we're seeing today. Charles Carroll, who our county was named after, who was a signer of the Declaration of Independence, he said, without morals, a republic cannot subsist any length of time. They, therefore, who are decrying the Christian religion, whose morality is so sublime and pure, are undermining the solid foundation of morals, the best security for the duration of free governments. You get rid of Christianity, and we won't be free. And you know what? That's true. The less Christianity is held in high esteem and recognized by those in high office, the less freedom we enjoy. There's just a direct correlation between the Danite might makes right approach, the mob rule, or those in Washington, we got all the guns, we got all the weapons, we got all the bombs. What are you going to do about it? Well, that's true. They do have all the weapons. What are we going to do about it? Well, we got weapons too. We don't forget that. But now, again, those rights are being infringed on. Our Second Amendment right is under attack every day. And so again, those things are happening while we speak, and they are the direct result of a lawless approach to our lifestyle and to our churches. I can't believe you don't have any thoughts or comments about that.
So chapter 18, things are bad. But chapter 19, toward the end there, the world will really see how that known world is how things really got bad.
It's going to get real bad when we get to chapter 19. You might want to bring your filters for your ears next week when we read that text. Pretty bad, yes.
So does that mean you're saying that every male Levite is a priest?
No, not every male Levite was a priest now. I would assume the grandson of Moses probably would be thought of that way and looked at too that way. But you're thinking, well, how could a real priest do that? How could a real preacher say, baptism ain't got nothing to do with salvation? They said all the time. How could a real preacher say that? I don't know. And he called himself a gospel preacher and still said, I don't know. It's stated categorically. And yet, people are constantly denying what God affirmed. I don't understand it. It's just, it ain't what it means. That's probably what they said about Deuteronomy 12. It ain't what it means. I know what I feel in my heart. It's okay to have these gods. I mean, nothing new under the sun, really. Did I miss something? You rang the bell, didn't you? Do what? You rang the bell.
He rang the bell while you were ranting.
I wasn't ranting. Do what?
You were ranting about him ringing the bell.
Oh, yeah, I was ranting about that, yeah. But he has such glee about it. He's like, he's going toward that button. You look what I'm going to do, Yeah, I know, that's why I love him. Is this everybody? 845 in your songbook, please. Don't forget the area-wide Widowhood Fellowship will be this Tuesday coming up, the 16th, at 11:30 a.m. If you can help providing food or would like to volunteer to serve at this event, please see Deanna about that. Friendsgiving Fellowship. Daniel and Ashley are going to be hosting a potluck Friendsgiving Fellowship here at the church building on Friday the 19th, starting at 6 o'clock. Please bring your favorite Thanksgiving food to share. Little Light Service Project will be assembling blessing bags to be delivered to local funeral homes and are asking for donations of the following items: pocket hand sanitizer, pocket tissue packs, individually wrapped mints, small notepads and pens. There's a receptacle in the foyer for these items, and the young families will meet together on the 21st following our morning service. Don't forget the family retreat payment. The second payment toward the family retreat in January are due now. Please see the Ashley sequence about this. Now, Amelia has gone home from the hospital. She made it home, didn't she? We're so glad that she did. Her blood sugar is under control, and we're praying for this good family that things will continue to normalize for them. Marilyn Lummis is going to be having a leaking valve dealt with tomorrow and another procedure. It's like every week she has yet another procedure, so she's still in the hospital. I spoke with Charles earlier today, and he was obviously very disturbed and distraught over her being gone so long, and pretty much in the dark as to what's happening with her. And so if you ever get a chance to go by and visit with him or call him, please give him some encouragement. And you can call Marilyn also. She's in the Paulding County Hospital in room 523. So please give her a call if you can. We have a couple of birthdays. One of them is my granddaughter that doesn't speak, so I won't name her name. And the other one is Tessa. Her birthday is today, and she's 25. And we're very happy for Tessa to be having her 25th birthday today. I don't want to make you seem any older than you are, Lisa. Yeah, you're welcome. But my mute granddaughter will be having a birthday Friday, and so if y'all want to be thinking about her when you sing happy birthday at the end of the service, Jonathan, which you're going to lead, right? We won't mention the unmentionable, but we'll mention Tessa. Any other comments or announcements we need to make tonight? 845 in your songbooks. The message tonight in Judges 17 and 18 was every man did what was right in his own eyes. They had simply rejected God's way and were doing whatever they wanted, however they chose to do it, and of course brought disaster on themselves and planted the seed for utter ruin that would be recorded in the following chapter, which we'll get to, Lord's willing, next Wednesday. It's always a disaster to reject God's word. It's always a mistake to assume you know better than God. When God's word says, he that believes and is baptized shall be saved, that's what we need to believe, and that's what we need to do. And we don't need to question it. We don't need to argue with it. We just need to get busy and do it, because this is what the Lord requires of us. When he tells us to live faithfully till death or to the point of death, that's what we must do, brethren, and be faithful throughout our walk. If there's anyone present tonight who feels the need to respond and knows that you're in need of responding to gospel obedience or for asking for the prayers of the church, if we can assist you in any way, please don't hesitate to make your need known while together we stand and as we sing.